Have you ever reached a money goal that you were convinced would finally fix your financial stress, only to realize a few months later that almost nothing actually changed? Maybe you finally crossed $60,000 in savings. Maybe you landed a new position paying $90,000 a year and thought, okay, this is it. This is the point where money stops stressing me out. Then real life showed up. Bills slowly got bigger. Spending expanded without you noticing. Random expenses kept appearing. And somehow you still found yourself opening your banking app before buying something simple and asking yourself, can I actually afford this right now? There's something interesting about financial security that most people completely misunderstand. There's a certain point where money stops feeling like a daily emergency. A number where your relationship with money begins changing in ways that have less to do with math and more to do with psychology. And for a lot of people, that number sits somewhere around $120,000 in accessible savings. I'm Della, and over the years I've spent a lot of time studying financial behavior, wealth psychology, and why certain money milestones create massive shifts in how people think, feel, and make decisions. If building financial freedom is something you're actively working toward, but you're not totally sure what financial security actually feels like in real life, or if you want to understand why crossing into six figures in savings changes so much, hit subscribe and drop a like if this gives you a new perspective. Because here's where most money advice completely misses the point. People talk about money as if progress works in straight lines. Like having $2,500 is exactly twice as good as having $1,250. Like $20,000 should feel 10 times better than $2,000. But your brain doesn't experience money that way. Money works more like checkpoints. Specific thresholds create entirely different experiences. And crossing from $119,999 to $120,000 creates a shift that feels dramatically larger than the extra dollar would suggest. Because around this level, something important happens. You stop feeling financially fragile even if you're nowhere close to being wealthy. Now before you immediately think, awesome. Another finance channel telling me I need six figures saved, like that's realistic. Stay with me. Because understanding why this threshold matters changes how you approach money altogether. This isn't about chasing a giant number for bragging rights. This isn't about screenshots for social media. It's about what happens to your decisions, your stress levels, and your entire relationship with risk when your savings reach a certain size. Once you understand the mechanics behind why six figures changes so much, you stop hoping money magically works itself out and start building towards something intentionally. So let's begin with the most obvious reason this amount feels different. For the first time, most people finally have what could actually be called a serious emergency cushion. Not the tiny starter emergency fund personal finance blogs love talking about. Not the 4 months of expenses guideline that sounds great until real life decides to test you. I'm talking about enough money to survive multiple problems happening at once without watching your financial life collapse. Think about how most people handle emergency savings. Maybe they've managed to put away somewhere between $6,000 and $12,000 and feel pretty responsible about it. And honestly, they should. That's already better than where a lot of people are. Then suddenly the transmission in their car fails. Repair bill? Around $3,500. Painful, but technically manageable because that's exactly what emergency savings exist for. Except now the account balance looks very different. That cushion that once felt comfortable suddenly feels thin. So they start rebuilding, cutting spending, saving aggressively, trying to get back to where they were. Then before they recover, something else breaks. Their computer dies unexpectedly. Medical costs pop up. An appliance quits. Suddenly another $1,800 or $2,200 disappears. Now stress levels explode because that safety net barely exists anymore. And one more bad surprise means debt. This cycle traps people for years. Build savings. Use savings. Rebuild savings. Repeat. They're technically doing everything right and still feel financially exhausted. It's like sprinting on a treadmill that never turns off. You're moving constantly, but never really getting anywhere. Now compare that to having around $120,000 available. Your car repair costs $3,500. Annoying. Your laptop replacement costs another $2,000. Frustrating. But financially devastating? Not even close. You deal with both situations and still have over $114,000 sitting there. You're not scrambling back from zero. You're not rebuilding from scratch. You're still standing on stable ground. And this is where the real transformation starts. Because the change isn't only mathematical. Obviously, larger savings can absorb bigger expenses. That part is simple. What actually changes is your emotional response to money. When your emergency fund is small, every unexpected expense feels enormous because each problem takes a meaningful percentage of your protection away. Every car noise creates anxiety. Every unknown phone call creates worry. Every expense feels like a threat. You live inside constant low-grade financial tension. Not panic. Not crisis. Just ongoing stress humming quietly in the background. But larger savings change the way your brain processes risk. A $3,500 repair against $120,000 is less than 3%. That same repair against $7,000 savings wipes out half your protection. Your brain reacts very differently to those situations. And because of that, something subtle but powerful happens. Financial surprises stop feeling like emergencies. They become inconveniences. That difference matters more than people realize. Because when money stops controlling your emotional state, your behavior starts changing too. Which leads to the second massive shift that happens once you build substantial savings. You stop making decisions from fear. Think about how most people operate financially when cash is tight. Every choice gets filtered through survival mode. Should I accept this better opportunity in another city? Too risky. What if I move and things go badly? Should I ask for higher pay? Maybe not. What if they get annoyed? Should I finally try building that side hustle I keep thinking about? Probably not. Need stability. Need the paycheck. Need certainty. When savings are small, fear quietly controls almost every financial decision. Not because people are irrational. Because they don't have enough margin for mistakes. And without margin, every risk feels dangerous. This is where larger savings completely change the game. Because when you've built something closer to $120,000 in liquid reserves, your options expand in ways that smaller savings simply can't provide. That new opportunity in another state? Now you can actually evaluate it instead of instantly rejecting it. If things don't work out, you have enough runway to recover. That salary negotiation you've been avoiding? Suddenly it feels less terrifying. Because even if the conversation goes badly, your entire life doesn't collapse. That business idea you've kept postponing? Now it becomes something you can experiment with instead of endlessly researching and never starting. This is what people mean when they say money creates freedom. But usually they explain it so vaguely that it sounds meaningless. Here's the practical version. Money gives you room to make decisions based on long-term outcomes instead of immediate survival. And that difference changes careers, relationships, health decisions, and entire life trajectories. There's another piece of this that almost nobody talks about openly. Financial stress steals mental bandwidth. And most people underestimate how expensive that really is. When money is tight, your brain never fully turns off. You're constantly calculating. Can I afford this? If I buy this now, what gets pushed back? How much is left before payday? Did that payment already clear? What if another bill hits this week? That mental loop runs continuously. Every day. Sometimes every hour. And over time, it drains you. Researchers call this scarcity mindset. When your brain stays occupied with survival problems, less mental capacity remains for everything else. Decision quality drops. Patience shrinks. Creativity suffers. Problem solving becomes harder. You become mentally exhausted from carrying financial stress around all day. Imagine trying to use your laptop while dozens of heavy programs are running invisibly in the background. Technically, it still works. But slower. Less efficiently. More frustratingly. That's what chronic financial pressure does to your brain. Now compare that to someone who has built substantial reserves. Once your savings account crosses into serious territory, much of that background noise begins disappearing. You stop opening your banking app multiple times a day. You stop calculating grocery totals before reaching checkout. You stop worrying whether one surprise expense will destroy months of progress. Your brain gets resources back. And this cognitive freedom might actually be more valuable than the money itself. Because now your mental energy can go toward growth instead of survival. Toward building skills. Toward relationships. Toward planning. Toward opportunities. Now maybe you're listening to this thinking, okay, sounds great, but building over $100,000 still feels impossible. And honestly, that reaction makes sense. If saving even $15,000 has felt difficult, six figures can sound completely disconnected from reality. You might be thinking about debt, rent, kids, bills, inflation, everything getting more expensive. And if you keep using the exact systems you use today, reaching six figures might genuinely take a very long time. But here's what makes this goal different from smaller milestones. Building serious savings forces transformation. Nobody accidentally saves $120,000. Nobody wakes up one morning shocked they somehow accumulated six figures. Getting there requires becoming financially different. And that process is what actually changes your life. Because building substantial savings isn't something you stumble into. You can accidentally save a few $1,000s. You might even accidentally build a decent emergency fund. But building something around $120,000 requires systems, discipline, and behavior changes that most people avoid. You have to consistently spend less than you make for years. Not for one motivated month. Not during New Year's resolutions. Repeatedly. You have to stop treating every raise like permission to upgrade your lifestyle. You have to learn how to keep money you earn instead of letting it disappear. You have to become more intentional about increasing income because expense cutting alone usually isn't enough. And here's the interesting part. The habits that help you build serious savings are the exact habits that keep creating wealth afterward. That's why the process matters as much as the number. Think about someone who reaches their first $12,000 in savings. That's a huge accomplishment. Seriously. Most people never get there. But the skill set required to save $12,000 is still relatively basic. Spend somewhat less. Avoid impulse purchases more often. Stay patient. Build consistency. Those skills matter. But they aren't always transformative. Now think about someone who builds six figures. That person has usually had to fight lifestyle inflation repeatedly. They've had to ignore social pressure. They've likely turned down purchases that felt emotionally rewarding in the moment. They probably made strategic career decisions. Negotiated compensation. Switched industries. Developed higher income skills. Stayed committed during periods where progress felt painfully slow. They watched friends upgrade cars. Buy expensive gadgets. Take luxury trips. Move into larger homes. And they still stuck with the plan. That creates a different relationship with money. The person with substantial savings doesn't just possess more dollars. They usually operate differently. Their decision-making process changes. Their emotional response changes. Their tolerance for delayed gratification changes. And because these habits become part of their identity, financial setbacks become easier to recover from. Even if they lose money. Even if emergencies happen. Even if markets decline. They've already learned the behaviors required to rebuild. Now there's another shift that starts happening around this point that almost nobody explains clearly. You begin understanding the difference between looking wealthy and actually being wealthy. Most people treat these as identical. They aren't. Being high income and being financially secure are completely separate things. A person earning $220,000 annually can still feel trapped if every dollar immediately leaves their account. Meanwhile, someone earning much less but consistently building assets may have far more flexibility. Income is flow. Wealth is accumulation. Income is what passes through your hands. Wealth is what stays. And once your savings reach serious levels, this distinction becomes impossible to ignore. Because suddenly your financial confidence stops depending entirely on next month's paycheck. That shift changes how you view almost everything. You stop chasing bigger paychecks just for status. You start caring more about retention rates, savings rates, investment growth, cash flow, asset building. People who appear rich often live inside expensive systems they cannot escape. Large houses, massive payments, luxury subscriptions, high fixed costs. Every month requires another huge paycheck. That's not freedom. That's dependency with nicer packaging. Meanwhile, someone with meaningful assets, even on a more modest salary, often has something much more valuable: flexibility. And flexibility creates options that income alone cannot buy. That flexibility becomes even more obvious once investing enters the picture. Because investing feels completely different depending on the size of your financial foundation. When someone has only a few $1,000s saved, investing often feels terrifying. Put $6,000 into the market and a correction wipes out 10%? That's hundreds of dollars gone. Emotionally, that feels huge. Big enough to create panic. Big enough to make people swear off investing entirely. Which is why so many people stay parked in low-yield savings accounts for years. Not because they don't understand investing. Because emotionally, volatility feels dangerous when your margin for error is tiny. But once you've accumulated around 6 figures in savings and investments, your relationship with risk starts changing. A market downturn still hurts. Seeing your portfolio temporarily drop $12,000 or $15,000 doesn't feel good. But it usually doesn't feel life-threatening anymore. Because your financial security isn't hanging by a thread. You have enough buffer to think long-term. And long-term thinking is where wealth gets built. This is one of the biggest differences between successful investors and everyone else. Successful investors aren't necessarily smarter. They're often simply more capable of staying calm while everyone else panics. And larger reserves make calm easier. There's another important shift too. Compounding finally starts feeling real. When your portfolio is small, growth feels slow. An 8% return on $5,000? Helpful. But not exactly life-changing. An 8% return on $120,000? Now you're talking about meaningful money. Thousands of dollars generated without additional work hours. Without overtime. Without asking your boss for approval. Without trading more time for income. And that's when something fascinating happens psychologically. You stop seeing money only as something you earn. You begin seeing money as something that can produce more money. This is the point where your financial engine changes. Before this stage, you are doing almost all the work. Every dollar comes from your labor. Your schedule. Your effort. Your energy. After building meaningful assets, you finally have a second engine running alongside you. Your savings and investments begin contributing too. And while investment growth may not replace your salary immediately, it starts covering pieces of your life. A vacation. Insurance premiums. Rent increases. Unexpected bills. Those contributions matter. Because every expense your assets cover is one less expense your paycheck has to handle. Then there's the relationship side of money, which people avoid discussing because it feels uncomfortable. But financial stress quietly shapes almost every relationship. When money feels scarce, it affects how you interact with everyone around you. You decline invitations because you're stressed about spending. You feel guilty accepting help. You avoid difficult conversations. You become resentful when other people seem financially comfortable. Even generosity becomes stressful. Because helping others sometimes means hurting yourself. But stronger financial reserves create a different environment. Helping a sibling with an emergency no longer automatically creates panic. Supporting family becomes possible without sacrificing stability. You gain the ability to be generous strategically instead of emotionally overextending yourself. That freedom feels powerful. Romantic relationships change too. Money disagreements consistently rank among the biggest relationship stressors. When finances stabilize, many of those arguments lose intensity. Future planning becomes easier. Career changes become easier. Conversations about housing, children, travel, or life goals become less stressful because every discussion isn't overshadowed by financial fear. Of course, savings alone won't create perfect relationships. But removing constant money pressure solves more problems than people expect. And finally, we arrive at perhaps the biggest shift of all. Your relationship with work changes. Completely. When savings are low, work often feels mandatory in the worst possible way. You tolerate toxic environments. Ignore burnout. Accept unreasonable demands. Stay quiet when boundaries are crossed. Because missing even one paycheck feels catastrophic. But once you build meaningful reserves, something subtle changes. You gain the power to walk away. Not permanently. Not irresponsibly. But psychologically. And that changes everything. A bad manager becomes less intimidating. A toxic company becomes easier to leave. Career risks become more realistic. Negotiations become stronger. Because you're no longer operating from desperation. You're operating from choice. Choice changes confidence. Confidence changes decisions. And better decisions often create even better financial outcomes. Now here's the uncomfortable reality. A lot of people will never build this level of security. Not because they're incapable. Because most people stay trapped in systems that consume every dollar they earn. Income rises. Spending rises. Lifestyle expands. Years pass. Nothing changes. People convince themselves they'll save later. Invest later. Get serious later. Then suddenly a decade disappears. And they wonder where all the money went. But if you decide intentionally that financial security matters more than appearances, more than constant upgrades, more than keeping up with everyone around you, your future starts looking very different. Because reaching 6 figures in savings isn't really about the number. It's about control. Control over stress. Control over time. Control over choices. Control over your future. The process itself is straightforward. Not easy, but straightforward. Spend less than you earn. Automate saving before spending. Invest consistently. Increase income intentionally. Avoid lifestyle inflation whenever possible. Repeat longer than feels comfortable. Keep going when progress feels slow. And one day you'll realize something strange happened. Money stopped feeling like an emergency. You stopped checking balances constantly. Unexpected expenses stopped ruining your week. Decisions became easier. Stress became quieter. And you finally built the thing most people are actually chasing when they chase money. Peace of mind. So the question isn't whether building substantial savings changes your life. It does. The real question is whether you're willing to build it deliberately, or spend the next decade wondering why earning more never felt like enough.